In the year 177 AD, a 15-year-old girl named Blandina was dragged through tunnels beneath the greatest monument ever built to human cruelty. The stone walls around her were slick with blood and waste. Above, 50,000 Roman citizens screamed for entertainment. What would happen to her over the next 3 days would send shockwaves through an empire that thought itself invincible. But Blandina was not the first, and she would not be the last. For 2,000 years, historians have shown you gladiator battles and marble columns, but they've kept something else hidden in the footnotes, something so disturbing that when archaeologists uncovered proof in 2019, the story vanished from headlines within a week. Your history textbooks gave you combat and spectacle. They didn't tell you about the ritual that happened before every game, the one Roman law required but modern scholars refuse to discuss in detail. They didn't explain the execution method designed specifically for women, so brutal it had its own legal classification. And they certainly didn't prepare you for what was found buried beneath the Colosseum's foundation, a discovery that proved the scale of horror was 10 times worse than anyone imagined. The evidence isn't vague. We have names, we have legal documents, we have bones, and we have graffiti carved into stone by Romans so disturbed by what they witnessed that they begged their war god for forgiveness. Let me paint you a picture of Rome at its height. The city gleamed with marble and gold, but that beauty was built on an ocean of human misery. 60 million slaves. That's 1 in every 3 people across the empire, not servants or workers, but property, less than human in the eyes of the law. The Colosseum itself was an engineering marvel, with 28 elevators lifting wild animals from below, a retractable awning operated by sailors, and even a drainage system for when they flooded the arena for mock naval battles. But beneath all that innovation were the holding cells. Dozens of them. Most people assumed they held gladiators waiting for combat. They didn't. Female captives filled those cells, war prisoners from Germania, Britannia, and North Africa. Women whose crimes included being Christian, refusing an arranged marriage, or simply being in the wrong place when Roman soldiers came through. Every single one of them was about to experience something worse than death, because death would have been mercy. For decades, historians obsessed over gladiator weapons and training regimens while glossing over what happened in those underground tunnels with one sanitized phrase: entertainment for the masses. Then in 1952, an archaeologist restoring a collapsed section found graffiti carved into stone, 6 Latin words. When translated, they read, "They took her screaming, 'Mars, forgive us.'" Mars wasn't the god of mercy or compassion, he was the god of war. What could be so horrifying that a Roman citizen, someone from an empire that crucified thousands without hesitation, felt compelled to ask a war god for forgiveness? The answer is recorded in legal texts, church documents, and the journals of eyewitnesses. And I promise you, it's worse than you imagine. The Romans had a term for it, a legal classification damnatio ad lupanar, condemnation to the brothel. But this wasn't a separate building across town. The brothel was the arena itself. Before the main events, before the gladiators fought and the animals hunted, the guards brought out female captives. Roman law classified certain women as infames without honor, and once you received that label, you lost all legal protection. Every protection. The crowd knew what was coming next. Vendors sold wine and honeyed dates, families ate lunch, children watched, because this wasn't hidden or shameful. It was scheduled entertainment. You might think the historical record must be vague about this, that we're inferring or speculating. We're not. We have names and detailed accounts from those who were there. Tertullian, a Christian writer who lived in Carthage around 200 AD, wrote an entire treatise describing how he attended the games and watched as women were given to gladiators as rewards for victory. But here's what nobody tells you. This wasn't some underground black market depravity. This was legal, regulated entertainment. The Roman Senate didn't just permit it, they scheduled it, assigned officials to oversee it, and designated specific days for it. The great games held every September always included what they called preliminary entertainments. If you're still with me, you're someone who understands that we can't learn from history if we sanitize it. The uncomfortable truth matters. If you believe that confronting darkness is the only way to prevent it from returning, then subscribe now, because next week I'm covering what happened in conquered cities after Roman victories. Events your textbooks describe as standard military occupation. I can tell you right now, there was nothing standard about it. One woman refused to participate in the preliminary ritual. We don't know her name because history didn't preserve it, but Tertullian recorded her story. When the guards came for her, she fought back. She injured 2 guards badly enough that they needed medical treatment. So the arena officials made a decision. They would make an example of her using Rome's most infamous execution method, one that would reveal just how calculated Roman cruelty truly was, because the Romans didn't just kill people, they turned murder into mythology. The execution method had a name, damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. But that phrase doesn't capture what actually happened, because the Romans didn't simply throw people to wild animals. They created theatrical productions where myth and reality merged into the same waking nightmare. The Romans loved their mythology, the stories of Hercules and Perseus, of gods and their victims, but they had a twisted innovation. What if they made the myths real? They staged fatal charades, elaborate performances of mythological scenes where the violence was genuine and the victim actually died. Female captives were the preferred cast for specific myths, the ones involving violation and violence. The poet Martial, writing around 80 AD during the Colosseum's inauguration, describes a performance of the myth of Pasiphae, a queen cursed to mate with a bull. In his account, they dressed a female prisoner in costume and brought out an actual bull. You might think that's metaphorical exaggeration, poetic license. But Josephus, the Jewish historian who witnessed the games held by Emperor Titus, confirms it. He writes about watching a woman in the role of Dierce tied to a bull and dragged to death. Josephus specifies that the woman's cries were genuine, as was her death. The Colosseum had a pulley system specifically designed for these performances. Archaeologists have mapped the underground machinery. There were platforms that lifted set pieces and people from below to the arena floor. There were trapdoors that released animals at precisely timed moments. This wasn't crude savagery. This was engineered spectacle with stage managers, set designers, and costume departments. One inscription found near the Colosseum lists job titles including animal handler, game producer, and something scholars believe translates as costume specialist for fatal performances. The woman who refused the preliminary ritual was dressed as Prometheus. You know the myth. Prometheus stole fire from the gods, so Zeus chained him to a rock where an eagle ate his liver every day for eternity. The Romans recreated it. They chained her to a post and released a trained eagle. It didn't kill her quickly. That was the point. Tertullian writes that she endured 3 attacks before finally dying. The crowd watched for hours. They ate, they cheered, they placed bets on how long she would last. The animals were trained for this. Professional animal trainers taught bears, lions, and bulls to attack in specific ways that would prolong the spectacle. Training manuals survived, actual instruction guides on how to condition a leopard to wound but not immediately kill. You might think that at least we have the complete historical record now, that modern archaeology has uncovered the full truth. That's what I thought too, until archaeologists started digging in 2019 and found something that proved we didn't know half of it. The Colosseum has been studied for centuries, measured and mapped by hundreds of scholars. So when the Italian Ministry of Cultural Heritage announced they'd defound an unexpected burial site during routine maintenance, nobody expected it to rewrite everything. In March 2019, workers were repairing a collapsed section of the foundation on the eastern side, the area usually closed to tourists. They were drilling to install support beams when the ground gave way. Beneath the foundation, they found a hidden chamber. Inside were human remains, lots of them. The archaeological team, led by Dr. Alessandra Giovannini, carefully excavated the site over 8 months. What they found shocked even veteran forensic anthropologists. 173 skeletons, all female, all showing signs of trauma, all dating to the Colosseum's active period between 80 and 300 AD. But here's what made the research team stop digging. The patterns of skeletal damage suggested repeated systematic trauma over extended periods. These women didn't die in single events. They were held long-term. Bone analysis revealed malnutrition, not starvation but controlled deprivation. They were fed just enough to keep them alive. Healed fractures showed broken bones that had mended, meaning they survived previous injuries and were kept for future use. Wrist and ankle bones showed grooves worn by shackles, evidence of long-term restraint. DNA analysis revealed these women weren't Roman. They came from across the empire: Germania, North Africa, the Middle East, Britannia. The age range was 12 to 30 years old. 12. Almost every skeleton showed signs of infections that Rome had treatments for, meaning these women were denied basic medical care. Their last meals were elaborate: fish, imported fruits, wine. Why would captives eat luxury food right before death? Because Romans believed sacrificial victims should be purified through specific diets. They weren't just killing these women, they were ritualistically preparing them. And then there's the detail that made international headlines before mysteriously disappearing from the news cycle within a week: evidence of pregnancy. Multiple skeletons showed pelvic changes consistent with childbirth or late-term pregnancy. The implications are unspeakable. Dr. Giovannini's team published their findings in October 2019. Within 2 months, the Italian government classified the burial site and suspended public access. The full report was supposed to be released in 2020. It still hasn't been published. One skeleton, labeled Subject 47, had something clutched in her hand. Her bones had fused around it. It took forensic specialists 3 weeks to carefully separate them without destroying the object. It was a small wooden cross, roughly carved, about 2 inches tall. Carbon dating confirmed it was 1850 years old, the same age as the skeleton. This woman died holding a symbol of a religion Rome was actively trying to exterminate. She died as a Christian martyr. And that brings us back to Blandina, the 15-year-old girl dragged through those tunnels in 177 AD. Here's what history forgot to tell you. She didn't just die, she won. Blandina was a slave in Lugdunum, modern-day Lyon, France. She was Christian, which in 177 AD made her a criminal. When Emperor Marcus Aurelius cracked down on Christian communities, she was arrested and transported to Rome for execution during the games. The detailed account comes from a letter written by surviving Christians, preserved by the church historian Eusebius. On the first day, they bound her to a post and released animals, but the animals wouldn't touch her. Lions, bears, even a trained bull refused to approach. The crowd saw it as a divine sign. The game's editor, furious, had her taken back to the cells. On the second day, they tried the preliminary ritual. A gladiator named Marcus, himself a slave, refused to participate. He was executed on the spot. His refusal inspired 2 other gladiators to refuse as well. The games descended into chaos. The crowd rioted. On the third day, they scourged her with 40 lashes, placed her in a red-hot iron chair, then put her in a net and exposed her to a bull. But Blandina's defiance created a political crisis. The games were supposed to demonstrate Roman power and divine favor. Instead, they showed that Rome's entertainment required unwilling participants, both victims and executioners. Within 25 years, Emperor Septimius Severus issued reforms that included restrictions on the use of female criminals in preliminary entertainments, and the first legal recognition that condemnation to beasts constituted cruel and unusual punishment. It wasn't enough. The practices continued, but Blandina's story spread across Christian communities. She became one of the most celebrated martyrs in early Christianity. Churches were named after her. Her feast day is still observed on June 2nd. In trying to destroy Christianity through public execution, Rome accidentally created its most powerful propaganda. The letters describing martyrs' deaths were copied obsessively, becoming some of the most detailed historical documents from this period. By 325 AD, Emperor Constantine had converted to Christianity and banned the fatal performances. The Colosseum became a symbol of everything Christianity opposed. 173 women in a mass grave, Blandina and countless others whose names we'll never know. Today there's a plaque on the Colosseum's eastern wall, added in 2020, that reads, "In memory of the nameless victims whose suffering is written in these stones." The Italian government still hasn't released the full archaeological report. The suffering of these women accidentally preserved the texts that describe their martyrdom, texts that helped Christianity grow from a persecuted sect to the dominant religion of Europe. History moves in strange ways. Sometimes the worst atrocities create unexpected consequences. Here's my question for you, and I want you to really think about this. Should modern Rome and the Catholic Church officially apologize for what happened in these arenas? Some argue that modern Italians aren't responsible for ancient Romans. Others say acknowledgement matters regardless of how much time has passed. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below.